Hamas held 3 female hostages in UN shelters. The hostages said they were kept captive among displaced Gazans, per Israel Channel 13 News. Now let's be clear. A UN shelter served as a military base. Hostages are likely being held captive in the UN shelters right now. This precedent threatens humanitarian workers' efforts everywhere. Do you know who runs Hamas UN shelters? You got it. Hamas UN Front, UNRWA. UNRWA is the UN special agency run by and for Palestinians, and of course, Hamas. UNRWA boasted that it runs all UN shelters. Remarkably, not one of UNRWA's supposed aid workers reported hostages hidden in UN shelters. Not one of UNRWA's supposed aid workers reported that Hamas was operating in the UN shelters. Remember, UNRWA has thousands of Hamas on staff, including October 7th murderers. UNRWA educated most Gazans, including October 7th murderers. Some UNRWA leaders are also Hamas leaders, and UNRWA diverted over $1 billion to Hamas since the October 7th murders. Sweden, the Netherlands, and now the US have defunded UNRWA. Switzerland and others are in the process. UNRWA is not an aid organization. It is a Hamas front. So tell your leaders, defund UNRWA. Do you know where else Hamas held hostages? The answer won't surprise you. Captured Hamas murderers confessed. Hostages were held in the Gaza hospital Israel just raided. Several Hamas terrorists caught last month said that hostages were held at different times at the Kamal Adwan hospital, per an exclusive Fox Digital report. You may remember 3 weeks ago that the UN objected to Israel's troops entering the hospital. Wondered why? Now you know. World Health Organization's Dr. Tedros demanded that Israel release Kamal Adwan Hospital's director, Dr. Hossam Abu Safia, who is also a colonel in Hamas. This is the same Colonel Abu Safia who was caught with 240 Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists in his hospital. 15 of them at least took part in the October 7th massacre. Hamas murderers hid behind hundreds of Gazan patients, endangering them and using them cynically as human shields. The Hamas hid hostages behind hundreds of Gazan patients. You see, terrorists don't get immunity just because they hide in the basement of a hospital. Now, the interesting and curious issue is that everyone knows this is happening. And yet it appears that the UN and some Western governments choose to pretend that this is not happening and that Israel is to blame. What they're actually doing is paving the way to their own demise, as radicalism knows no boundaries, no borders, and no respect for anything or anyone. Now let's take some questions from our audience watching live on social media.
Thank you, Ruth. Our first question comes from Instagram. I saw reports that Egypt moved large amounts of armored vehicles into the Sinai in areas that the Israel-Egypt peace deal forbids. What's going on there?
So this is a very, very good question. It's a worrying question. Already for some time, there is an enhancement of the military buildup of the Egyptians in the Sinai Peninsula. Now, for some part of it, this was allowed by the Israeli government in order for the Egyptians to be prepared to take on the terrorist threats that are within the Egyptian realm, for example, ISIS and so on. However, the actual military buildup seems more like something to deal with an army, with a country's army, rather than a terrorist organization. And the fact that they've started moving their tanks and vehicles in the Sinai Peninsula is even more worrying. And this is a question that we need to check. This is a question that the American newly incoming administration needs to be with their hind legs checking every movement and what stands behind this exact question, because it is a very concerning issue.
Thank you. Our next question also comes from Instagram. Qatar's prime minister just told an Israeli journalist that he wants to speed up negotiations on the next phases of the hostage ransom deal. What is Qatar's interest in this deal?
Well, let's put it this way. When you allow a cat to take care of the cream, you cannot be surprised when the cream disappears. And that's exactly what is happening with Qatar. Qatar is the cat and the deal is the cream. You see, the Qataris have every interest in the deal, or the so-called deal, because it is a very, very problematic deal, which in fact makes sure that the Hamas remains in power in the Gaza Strip, gets billions of dollars to so-called rehabilitate the Palestinian Gazans in the Gaza Strip, while taking a lot of those billions of dollars in order to rebuild their strength, rebuild their military equipment and personnel, and rebuild the tunnels. That's what they will use the money for, and that's what they will use the ceasefire for. Did you notice that Iran, or the Islamic Republic of Iran, is also very happy with the deal? Why? You ask yourselves, right? Because this is a very good deal for Qatar, for the Muslim Brotherhood, for radical Islam, for Hamas, and for the Islamic Republic of Iran. And in order to make them even stronger, also in the West Bank and not only in the Gaza Strip, as Iran has been doing for the past few years, strengthening radical Islam and the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in the West Bank. So why would Qatar want to make the deal even faster? Because they want the money to go through. They want the terrorists that are sitting in Israeli prisons, not because they are just there because Israel arrested them, but because they murdered hundreds and thousands of Israelis and they have blood on their hands. They want them released. They want a new leadership to be there in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. And you know, some of those terrorists will be released to East Jerusalem, to the Gaza Strip, and to the West Bank. So they have every interest for the deal to go through and to make it quicker. Why? Because it serves their precise interest of enhancing the strength of the terrorists.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Javi on Instagram. Why is Israel allowing the PA, the Palestinian Authority, to monitor the Rafah crossing? Why are they being trusted?
So there was a lot of pressure on Israel to accept this deal. First of all, we have the moral responsibility to bring back our hostages. Instead of pressing the Hamas, Qatar, and other factors like Egypt, the world is pressing and was pressing on the Israeli government to bring them back. But whatever happens, we have to bring them back. They are suffocating in the tunnels, they are being tortured in the tunnels, and they are being held by people who are not really people, who are acting in the worst, most heinous way towards other people. This is inhumane. So we have to do everything to bring them back. However, we do not trust the Palestinian Authority. In fact, we brought some of the Palestinian Authority to try to go into the Gaza Strip several months ago and to take care of distributing the humanitarian aid. Do you know what happened to those Palestinian Authority people? They were murdered, killed, and blown away by the Hamas because the Hamas was having none of it. You want us to believe that the Palestinian Authority is strong enough to take the place of Hamas or to stand in the face of Hamas in the Rafah crossing, in the Philadelphia crossing, within the Gaza Strip? Forget it. If anybody believes that in the international arena or in the West, it is pure naivete. They cannot do it, and the Hamas will not let them do it. And the only reason why they want this to happen is because they know that they are weak, and they will serve as a front for the Hamas still leading the Gaza Strip. Why did Israel agree? Because they have our people. We have to get our people back. Once we get them back, then we'll discuss what to do.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Medina on Instagram. Yesterday, there was another terrorist attack in Tel Aviv of a stabbing by a Moroccan citizen with a U.S. green card. This is the second attack in Tel Aviv in just a week. Is Israel now ramping up its security, and what's their response?
So first of all, as an Israeli and as an Israeli mom to kids who are growing up in Israel, I'm sharing the fear of many Israelis with the growing terrorism, but this is not new to us. You see, the world is not with us and not interested in understanding what people, innocent people, civilians are going through for years in Israel. Terrorist activities, terrorists cutting people, blowing themselves up in the middle of streets, in the middle of buses. This has been happening for years, not to mention rockets flying on top of people's heads in the south for over 2 decades. And nobody said a word. This is not normal. There is something completely abnormal about terrorists surrounding us from the Gaza Strip, from the West Bank, from Lebanon, now from Syria, from all over the place, and they are being funded and aided by the Islamic Republic of Iran, by Qatar, by Erdogan's Turkey. It's time that the West wakes up. October 7th happened, and this was supposed to be the wake-up call. Wake up and smell the coffee. This is happening in your backyards as well. They are planning exactly the same thing. They're saying it. They're not hiding it. It's not even a secret. It's not between the lines. It's in our faces. What they're doing here is what they are doing in the US, clandestinely, a little bit more overtly since October 7th, but still clandestinely, in Europe, in Canada, in Australia. They are against anything that is not radical Islam. And this is something that the good people, the people that share the interests and the values of the West, need to unite and fight together. Is Israel prepared? Yes. But is this normal? No.
Thank you. This is our final question. 4 more Israeli hostages are set to be released on Saturday. Robin asks, do we know if the next list of hostages are alive?
So the interesting thing is that one of the things that Israel and the world asked Israel to capitulate to is basically to the fact that the Hamas will not tell who is alive and who is not alive. We sincerely believe, pray to God, and hope that the 4 women hostages that are to be released this coming Saturday are indeed alive. But do we have absolute guarantees? Well, you have no such thing as an absolute guarantee with the Hamas as a designated terrorist organization, completely inhumane and completely not to be trusted. But mind you, if we expect them to be alive and they will be returned not alive, they will be held to pay. And there will be, because there's a limit to how much the Israeli civilians will be able to stomach from that absolutely heinous, atrocious terrorist organization. Thank you so much for being with us. Not easy, but very, very important. Thank you for listening and for being our ambassadors abroad. And we wish to see you tomorrow as well, as usual, at 3 p.m. Israel time. Thank you.